The Supreme Court rules the federal carbon tax is constitutional. A big blow to three provinces challenging it: Ontario, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. It wasn't a unanimous decision, but a majority of justices sided with the feds. The ruling essentially boils down to this, according to Chief Justice Richard Wagner. The threat of climate change is so great it requires a national response. Let's get the reaction from Scott Moe. He's the Premier of Saskatchewan. He joins us from the legislature in Regina. Hi, Premier Moe. Good to see you as always. Thank you so much for making the time.
Well, thank you, Bessie.
You said today, following this decision, that you'll submit a plan for a carbon price or a carbon tax on fuel that will mirror New Brunswick's to the federal government. Why didn't you just do that earlier and save the expense of fighting this for taxpayers?
So this was the right fight to have. This is an ineffective policy from Saskatchewan's perspective, and in particular in our province. It's not a policy that anywhere near the majority of Saskatchewan people would be in favor of. And it is essentially a fuel tax on families that are driving themselves to work, driving their kids to school, to recreational opportunities, and on families that are heating their homes. Where the real sizable portion of emissions are in the industries in Saskatchewan, of where we have already moved, in collaboration, I would add, and by approval of the federal government with our plan for prairie resilience, our output-based emissions plan, that has been in effect in Saskatchewan for some period of time with the approval of the federal government. So our dispute has always been with the carbon tax on fuel. We don't feel it is in any way an effectual tax in reducing emissions. We just think it's a cost on families and a cost on jobs.
The way you're characterizing the federal carbon tax as it's being applied by the federal government, though, isn't necessarily accurate. You're saying it's ineffective because it just taxes, for example, everyday people who are using their cars. It does that, but it also provides them with an equal rebate. In the case of an average family of four in Saskatchewan, it's about $1,000. So how is it ineffective? If it incentivizes people to use less fuel, let's say, but doesn't end up costing them, at the end of the day, how are they out in that scenario?
It doesn't incentivize in any way using less fuel. It costs them money.
How do you know that?
Is ultimately what it does here in this province. We're in a very dispersed province. People need to drive to get to work. Myself, I live 4 hours away from my office, for instance. Now that's the extreme, of course, but people and families need to drive around this province, and we need to heat our homes over the course of the last 8 months. Our homes are using fuel to keep them warm and keep people alive here in the province and across Canada. Even by the federal government's own measures, the fuel tax does not reduce in any measurable way in this province, for sure, emissions, by any measurable amount. That happens on the heavy emission side, the heavy output-based emissions plan that we've put forward. That's where the real action occurs, and we've been working with the federal government on that side for some period of time now.
Okay, but I just want to point out that on the other side of it, to say that it doesn't show that it's having any effect, it does show, most calculations show that as that carbon tax does increase, that it does incentivize behavior. It does have an impact overall on emissions. Anyway, we've litigated that many times before. Yeah. Let's move on. I want to get more details on the plan that you will submit. The New Brunswick plan, basically, as I remember it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you go to the pump and the amount of excise taxes, so other taxes, are reduced, and there's a carbon tax. So the net effect is not quite as great as it would be if you just applied the carbon tax. Is that what you plan to submit to the feds?
Yeah, we plan to return as much money from this ineffective tax to Saskatchewan people as quickly as we can, and there's no place quicker to do it than right at the pump. So the plan that we come forward with will do that and effectively return as much as possible to people before they even purchase their fuel. And I think that brings us back to the point as to what possible effect could this carbon tax have, as it's been approved in other provinces. What possible effect could it have on actually reducing emissions?
So I had a chance to speak with the federal environment minister. We did an interview that we taped before this, and it will air in a few minutes. But I put to him what New Brunswick had proposed and that you said that yours would line up. And he intimated to me that based on the more aggressive standards that they're pursuing as announced in December, New Brunswick's plan probably wouldn't fly if submitted for approval now. And therefore, I draw from that yours probably won't either, because if you're taking away any increase at the pump, then you are, as you say, making it less effective. Your response to that?
Well, that's a very, very unfortunate comment to have from the federal government and from the federal environment minister, who this morning said he would absolutely work with provinces that would put forward a plan. What's approved in New Brunswick, we would expect would be approved ultimately in the province of Saskatchewan. They can't be changing the yardsticks, although they did when they promised that the carbon tax would never go above $50 and then quickly moved it to $170 at the first opportunity. So if they're moving the goalposts on this, that is a tremendous problem. If they're hiding behind a Supreme Court ruling and starting to move the goalposts on what they will and won't approve, they have a duty as a federal government to treat all Canadians in an equal fashion. That's why we've also asked for our share of the Low Carbon Economy Fund, which I say New Brunswick has received, every other province and territory has received, but they've withheld it from Saskatchewan. We're asking them now, as we move forward with our plan, which will be similar to other plans that they've approved, so we would expect they do, that they also provide us with our share of the Low Carbon Economy funding. People in Saskatchewan are still Canadians at this point, most certainly. The federal government has a duty to treat all Canadians the same, and we expect nothing less.
And I had a feeling you would say that, so I put that that was my guess, that your response would be you're treating one part of the country different than another. I put that to him, and he indicated that it wasn't a case of that it was a case of the targets becoming more aggressive. We know that as laid out in this decision, for example, the crisis is existential when it comes to climate change. Therefore, in December, the government augmented its targets. It will continue to do so in April when it comes to the 2030 ones. Given the nature of the crisis, is it not understandable from the federal government's perspective that they may now be looking through a different lens to analyze the plans that are put forward?
You don't have the opportunity as a federal government to look through a different lens in one part of the country than you do in a different part of the country. We would ask that our low carbon economy fund would be provided. We have the project sitting on the federal minister's desk. We've also asked for our power and energy company to be brought in under the provincial plan, retroactive to 2019. And when we submit a fuel plan that will be similar to what other areas in the country have approved, it is a full expectation as Canadians living in this province that the federal government would treat us all the same and would accept that plan lock stock.
What are you going to do, Premier, with the revenues that you get from that carbon tax?
Well, the bulk of the revenues, and as much as we are able, we're going to return them right at the pumps.
As much as you're able. So I'm just not clear, because you would be reducing other taxes, I take that, but you'd still be drawing revenue from a carbon tax, especially because that carbon tax has to increase over the next number of years. What will you do with that pool of revenue? Will it be directly rebated to Canadians as the federal one is, or will it be put into some fund of some sort?
The 65, I believe in New Brunswick's case, 65% of the carbon tax is rebated right at the pumps, and 35% is put into some degree of a fund. We haven't discussed what we'll do with the other 35% at this point, but our primary focus is to ensure that Saskatchewan people are impacted as little as possible by this tax, given that it is an ineffective tax from an environmental perspective. We just want to ensure that Saskatchewan people are protected to the greatest degree that we can.
Just before I let you go, Premier, I know you keep saying that it's ineffective. Is that a smart argument to be making right now, given the Supreme Court's decision?
The Supreme Court never said that it was effective. They said that the federal government has the constitutional power to enact it. It makes the carbon tax no more effective today than it was yesterday. It does not reduce emissions. As I've always said, it only costs families money, and it does, in many cases, add costs to businesses that are using fuel to heat their place of business. Farmers in Saskatchewan that are drying their food products to send around the world. So we're going to minimize that cost to the greatest degree possible. And we're going to continue on our plan to continue to reduce emissions with our industries here in Saskatchewan through our provincial heavy emitter plan, which has been working well and has been working well right alongside and approved by the federal government. So we have a very robust climate change strategy in place here in Saskatchewan. Given the court ruling today, which does not in any way increase the effectiveness of carbon tax, but does say that we have to move forward in looking at how we can implement this type of a fuel charge. And so that is what we will look at. But we're going to look at doing it in a way that preserves the health and wealth of Saskatchewan people. Just
very quickly before I let you go, Premier, you mentioned that your plan is doing well. I searched high and low for progress reports. I looked through your entire prairie plan. I think you said the name of it earlier. I'm sorry, it's about 13 pages. Are you close to meeting your targets? Are you on track to meeting your targets? Is there anything publicly?
Our plan for prairie resilience does continue to reduce emissions in our industries here in the province, as we've been in effect now, I believe, just over 2 years. We're adding into that, as I mentioned today as well, the carbon offset system that we have. And as you know, we have a vibrant forestry industry and an agriculture industry that are sequestering carbon each and every day. And now bringing into that our carbon capture and storage, enhanced oil recovery, and some opportunities in a few other industries that are looking at just this type of technology. So most certainly, as we move forward and fully implement the plan for prairie resilience that we have, the methane equivalency plan that we have with the federal government, our coal-fired equivalency plan with the federal government that recognizes the investment in emissions reductions of CCS, we most certainly are running, our industries are running at a much more efficient level than they ever have here in the province, and will continue to reduce emissions for years into the future. The gas tax, on the other hand, will not.
Will that information be publicly available? Will we be able to track whether emissions have been reduced?
And you will also be able to track the degree at which sequestration in this province is being increased. And we're looking forward to engaging with the federal government on ITMOs so that we can capture the credit for our exported uranium used in clean nuclear power around the world, our exported and manufactured zero-till drills that are sequestering carbon in Australia and in Germany and across Europe, as well as the United States. And we've always asked the federal government to engage on these international agreements so Saskatchewan can be fully recognized for the effort that we're making in providing the opportunity for Canada to get to a net zero carbon conversation.
Okay, Premier, sorry, I'm out of time. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Vashi. I appreciate it.
That's Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe. Welcome back. The federal government chalked up a big win today. The Supreme Court ruled the federal carbon tax is constitutional. It was a 6-3 decision. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice Richard Wagner writes, "Climate change is real. It is caused by greenhouse gas emissions resulting from human activities, and it poses a grave threat to humanity's future." For that reason, the court says climate change requires a national approach, a blow to several provinces challenging it legally or opposed to it in principle.
We respect that the Supreme Court has ruled. We don't agree with the ruling, but I've played enough hockey to know that we're not going to do a lot of fruitful arguing with the referees after the game is over.
It reaffirms that this is a national issue, an international issue that needs to be addressed. And I think it also reaffirms very clearly that the federal government doesn't have an unfettered right to tell provinces how to address it.
To me, it's inconceivable that a court would allow the federal government to pull a rabbit out of the constitutional hat to say that the clear meaning of the Constitution over provincial jurisdiction on resources does not exist.
Jonathan Wilkinson is the Federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Hi, Minister Wilkinson. Great to have you back on the show. Thanks for making the time.
Not at all. Thank you.
I wanted to start off on the decision itself and what some concerns expressed today by premiers, primarily that the decision opens up the door for your government to force other climate change measures beyond the price on carbon on the provinces. Can you tell them explicitly that that's not your government's intent?
Well, that's not the government's intent, and I'm not sure exactly why folks are saying that. At the end of the day, this was about pricing of pollution, and what the court said is that climate change is an issue of national concern, and the pricing of pollution is a reasonable regulatory response for a national issue. We have said that all along. It is an important part of a comprehensive plan, but it's not the only part, and there are lots of other parts that we are working actively with provinces on developing and implementing.
I guess it's the other parts that they were voicing some worry about. So, for example, if in the realm of what was decided by the Supreme Court, something else is deemed necessary because climate change is an existential threat, and there's some pushback from provinces. Is it your intent to employ this decision in other realms, or what is it really just about the carbon tax or the price on carbon for you?
Well, we're certainly not thinking about deploying this decision in other realms. The focus is on having a comprehensive plan that allows us and all Canadians to have visibility about how we meet our targets and how we actually move towards creating an economy that's going to create jobs and economic opportunity in what is going to be a low carbon world of the future. So, we want to work with the provinces and territories. We always have, but I'm certainly going to be reaching out to all of my counterparts to have conversations about how we can collaborate going forward to ensure that Canada is playing its part internationally and enhancing its level of ambition And I would say that at times, I think the discord that some focus on with respect to the work with provinces and territories is a little bit overblown. There are lots of areas in which all provinces are working with the federal government to enhance work that they are doing.
Okay, let me ask you about those specific areas then and what overtures might be made. We just heard from the Premier of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe, who says that he plans to submit a plan to your government for a carbon tax on fuel in line with what New Brunswick submitted. So their plan, and just for our viewers who are watching right now, basically reduced other taxes at the pump, but did implement a carbon tax. Is that something that I know you don't have the submission right in front of you yet, but is that something in theory that your government would be open to?
So, as you say, I don't have the submission in front of me, but what I would say is we've always been open to provinces and territories putting in place their own price on pollution as long as it meets certain criteria. And that means that it has to achieve equivalent outcomes in terms of emissions reductions. And so certainly we're open to listening to plans that provinces bring forward. I think, though, if you're talking about essentially putting in place a price on pollution and then simultaneously taking off other taxes at the pump, that would be problematic because that would defeat the whole purpose. It would defeat the price signal that exists, which actually incents people to adopt more efficient behavior. But certainly there are lots of other ways to ensure that you are rebating the money, just like we do with consumers.
So how did New Brunswick get around that? And just to be clear to our viewers as well, that's their initial proposal. They're now considering maybe going the rebate route, for example, and not further decreasing other taxes. They'll just keep increasing the carbon tax. But at least they wanted to blunt the impact for that first year. So how did New Brunswick get around it? And in theory, Saskatchewan, may not.
So, I mean, one of the things that we announced when we put forward the new climate plan in December is a need for, as we escalate the price on pollution, that we actually are strengthening the benchmark as well, and that the focus needed to be on provincial systems providing equivalent outcomes in terms of emissions reductions to the federal system. There have been specific things that have been done, and you point to the case of New Brunswick, where that hasn't necessarily been the case because of the way that the benchmark was structured in the past. And that is something that we are looking to change and to fix on a go-forward basis, so that the price on pollution is doing what it should be doing, which is reducing emissions and incenting innovation. That's a conversation that we're having with all the provinces and territories as we speak.
In layman's terms, and I hope I'm understanding you correctly, and by no means I'm an expert, so I apologize in advance to our viewers, but does that mean that this time around, if the benchmark changes, New Brunswick, for example, might not have seen that plan meet federal standards a year from now?
Yeah, I think that's potentially the case, because, as I say, the focus has to be on ensuring that the price signal still exists, that people are incented. The whole point of the price on pollution is people and businesses are incented to make different choices with respect to energy efficiency and with respect to reducing emissions. So not getting in the way of the price signal, but ensuring that you are addressing the affordability issue, as we have done, for example, with the consumer rebates, where the majority of Canadian families are better off.
And I understand that point, but I think you can guess as well as I can that when the Premier of Saskatchewan submits that plan and New Brunswick got it through somehow and his does not, let's say, he will say that your government is playing favorites. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'd respond to that by saying we were very clear when we announced the climate plan in December, and all provinces and territories heard that. And I've talked to every minister since that time to actually go through this. We did say that there was a need to strengthen the benchmark to ensure that we were getting the emissions reductions that are behind the whole point of a price on pollution and the whole point of a climate plan. So that wouldn't be a surprise to Premier Moe or to anybody else. But of course, we are collaborating and having conversations with them. And I look forward to having conversations with Premier Moe and with his government on ways in which Saskatchewan could look to implement a price on pollution that is customized to meet the specific needs of Saskatchewan. I mean, look, I grew up in Saskatchewan. I worked for the government of Saskatchewan. I have a pretty reasonable understanding of that province. And I'm certainly very sympathetic to trying to ensure that there is space for Saskatchewan to make choices that are specific for its economy. But it has to drive emissions reductions. Otherwise, what are we doing?
Let me ask you about strengthening those benchmarks, because I heard you say in your press conference earlier today that you'll be announcing a new target to reduce GHGs in Canada at the Earth Summit next month. Do you specifically mean more aggressive targets for 2030?
Yes, I mean specifically more aggressive targets for 2030. I think the Americans will also be announcing a more aggressive target, and I hazard a guess that there will be other countries that will be bringing new targets to that event, and obviously some to COP26 in Glasgow. The focus for us is looking at areas where we can enhance level of ambition. We said that when we released the climate plan, which is work with the Americans on issues like transportation and methane, work with the provinces and territories, because the December plan was about federal measures, and we certainly expect, and I think all Canadians expect, that provinces and territories are going to do more. And then looking at additional things the federal government can do in terms of things like investments. So yes, we are looking to enhance our level of ambition. We need to ensure our targets are aligned with the science, and countries around the world are going to have to raise their level of ambition to ensure that's the case.
And some countries already have, and I know you're not going to tell me by exactly how much more aggressive those targets are going to be because you're announcing them in April. But can you quantify or characterize how much more aggressive you think they need to be? Not giving me a specific percentage, but when you talk about the science, there are multiple studies that have come out in the past 2 years saying that those targets set in Paris were simply not enough to address the crisis as it stands right now. Are we talking a doubling, for example, of targets in 2030?
So you are right that the targets that have been committed to under the Paris Agreement are not sufficient. In fact, if they were all fully implemented, you would see a rise in global average temperature of more than 3 degrees Celsius, which would be catastrophic. Paris says that we need to drive to less than 2-degree rise in global average temperature, and ideally to 1.5. And so we are looking at a range of different options to allow us to be more aggressive, to be aligned with respect to the science. I'm not going to give you a specific number today because that's a work in progress, and it's certainly a work in progress with provinces and territories. But it is an important piece of work that we are doing as we think about how to do this in an environmentally sensible and responsible way, but also in an economically responsible way. I mean, Canada needs to have a new economic strategy that is recognizing that the world is moving to low carbon, and economies that are not moving in that direction are going to suffer.
And just to be clear, that specific number, though, will be announced at the Earth Summit.
We will be bringing a new target to the Earth Summit.
Okay, Minister, I'll leave it there. Thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.